何ですかその奇妙な乗り物は。
今流行ってるんですよ。
Anyone else miss the days when those things and not their electronic descendants were the only menaces on the sidewalk? Cold opener for this one was one of the more straightforward examples of highlighting the unfortunate main focus of this episode. Hell, the episode proper would pretty much get right into it with Aiko deciding to take a shortcut to the Mahodo and ended up passing through a basketball game that Leon of the Flat 4 was playing in. And while she probably could have just have gone around the court since it was crowded and they were in the middle of a game, I guess if they did that, we wouldn't have a plot. I don't know, Aiko. I think Hana still has you both beat. Meanwhile, while waiting on a report from Akatsuki, Oyashi tried to get a drink of water and threw out his hip. Now, normally, I'd at least sympathize with the guy as a fellow man myself, but at the same time, I would never drink out of a public water fountain. Those things were disease-ridden petri dishes even before 2020. Anyway, when Akatsuki finally arrived, Oyashi did kind of rightfully chew him out and the rest of the Flat 4 for not doing their job of kidnapping Hana, and not even for moral reasons or anything, but more because they just want to play around. I mean, of course, I always appreciate the Oyashi torture, but these guys aren't exactly being presented as the best antagonists they can be. Case in point, Leon couldn't figure out the difference between McDonald's and Planet Fitness.
Me are number 1. You are number 2.
That'll do. But yeah, he was training for a rematch against Aiko for showing him up. The next day, said spoiled Ojamajo tried to share her passion with her daughter. Yeah, I wouldn't suggest that, Aiko. Anyway, later when they went on a little walk, they ended up on the same basketball court where Leon asked for a rematch after making about a dozen excuses for why he lost previously. Aiko, you're in a toy production. You have to fulfill a certain stereotype quota.
Spirit Ranger! Zico Brown! Return Brown! Yeah! A minute, yeah!
So yeah, I'll just come right out and say it. Stuff like this is why it's so hard to get into the main conflict of this episode. I mean, to put it simply, Leon is a loser in every sense of the word. As a result, the running gag of him challenging Aiko at every possible chance wears thin very fast, as we already know the punchline every time. I just end up feeling like Hana and want to chase around a dragonfly instead, which she was able to do from her stroller thanks to her god baby powers. Also, yeah, this episode doesn't paint Aiko in the best light either, as it takes a call from her friends to realize the baby that she was supposed to watch and has been established as being able to get overheated easily was gone. Now, I will give her points for shutting Leon up about continuing their game.
Thank you!
However, Aiko would still end up playing with him, and while I can understand her playing some of these games as he was in her way, and she did manage to quickly resolve them, the latter ones like this unicycle race and vaulting were not only ridiculous, but again, shouldn't you be looking for your baby who only narrowly managed to escape some tired cliches? Truck-kun, your isekai numbers are down this month. Granted, she was still susceptible to some older cliches, like flying out of her cart and onto that one cat from the first season. Yeah, didn't really think we'd see this thing again. Meanwhile, the rest of Ojamajo decided to help with the search and tried to use their tracker to find their child, and instead found Oyashi, and this is starting to feel just a little vaguely familiar. Well, anyway, they figured that he knew where Hana might be, so they trapped him in their laptop that they could have just used to confirm that she wasn't around the area, and from there, they sent in their fairies to butter him up, and again, this is really starting to feel familiar. Well, anyway, they tried to massage away his back pains to get him to talk, but they just didn't have the technique. Fortunately, Aiko's fairy Mimi did have the ability to make him humble.
And now the accolade. Now it's locked in. Now Rusev has it in. Can Sheamus fight out of this?
But yeah, as I said, Aiko was still playing things out with Leon, and thus couldn't directly help with this search, even though this is technically supposed to be her spotlight episode. Anyway, Oyaji of course didn't know exactly what was going on, but was able to assume that this was the work of his assistants in the Flat Four, who he was able to provide at least a vague description of.
そいつらはい
い男ではないな。
Well, at least this toad has good taste in animated films. Ultimately, he couldn't provide much more intel than the most boomer descriptions, so the Ojamajo just went back to their tracking device, which again, they really should have just have stuck with. That said, with Hana riding on the fat cat, tracking her random movements became incredibly difficult, thus they decided to just activate their pottering forms, with Aiko literally phoning in her part of the spell. And while they were transforming, Hana ended up in the hands of Oyaji, which the Ojamajo mistook as him lying to them earlier. 32. This is just episode 32 all over again. Yeah, aside from featuring a different member of the Flat Four, this episode, in particular this whole setup with Oyaji, is pretty much the same. One of the Ojamajo lose Hana, the remaining three look for her with their tracker, they think Oyaji has her, they trap him in the laptop, have their fairies butter him up, leading to him revealing that he was being assisted by the Flat Four, and when they don't find Hana, they activate their pottering forms without one of their members present, and from there, Oyaji ends up with Hana by chance, leading to a misunderstanding and beat down by the Ojamajo.
There's deja vu. There's language processing. There's deja vu.
Like, it's not even a clever callback or anything. They're pretty much just recycling this whole setup with little actual variation, resulting in it not being as funny the second time around, especially when last time we had that great little Ratatouille moment. And in case you're wondering, no, it's not a case of a writer repeating themselves, as this episode had a different writer than 32's, who we'll get to in just a bit, but really, this just sums up the episode. It's a joke that we've already heard. Anyway, the episode ended with them getting Hana back, and Aiko resolving things with Leon by saying that she admired his guts, aka his needless persistence from being a sore loser. And telling him that maybe one day he'll become the, I don't know, the Sasuke to her Naruto, or more likely, the Sonic to her Saitama. Of the Flat 4 introduction episodes so far, this was definitely on the weaker end. To make it clear, I don't really dislike Leon or anything, but like Kimitaka from last week, I also don't find him all that interesting when he's so far just been a one-note character. Then again, I think the bigger problem in general is just how this was basically a lesser version of episode 32, which also happened to have a much better introduction to a Flat 4 member. Kind of unfortunately, the writer of this one was again Yoshimi Narita of Precure fame, and while I generally like her work, her track record for this show, and as of late, has been bumpy to say the least. Granted, this is still miles ahead of her worst scripts of the season so far, and more just a rather mediocre, or flat episode you could say. Getting right to it, Leon is just not that interesting of a character. Just some brat who was embarrassed by the fact that he lost her girl and tried to get back his win, all the while making incredibly vague excuses like the sun got in his eyes or something. And normally, I wouldn't mind these sorts of hot-headed characters, especially in anime, but because of him, Aiko was largely removed from the events of this one, in spite of losing Hana in the first place. Now, it would have been interesting if she actually put her foot down and told him to just go away, which then could have led to him helping in the search just to play another game with her, and ironically going against the main objective of his team. It'd be a lot more interesting than just having the whole team forget their goals for this episode and repeat a plot from 4 episodes ago. Which, yeah, on that note, 32 was just a superior version of this one in almost every way. It had better jokes that didn't get repetitive and were still fresh, and even had a more interesting subplot for the Flat 4 member in Fujio and his conflictions of kidnapping a little baby. Meanwhile here, I just didn't feel anything when Aiko offered to become Leon's rival, when he's already lost her many times already, but also never really showed the so-called guts, unless you interpret being stubborn as gutsy rather than poor sportsmanship. Aiko until the end of the episode was clearly more annoyed by his persistence, so why the sudden change and needless acknowledgement of his frankly toxic behavior? It's just an overall very middling episode due to the lack of proper character building and obvious recycling of a previous plot. While there is still one more Flat 4 boy who's gonna get a spotlight episode, I'm willing to bet that it will be at least more interesting than watching Leon strike out harder than Quada from Danganronpa. With that though, I think we'll just go back into finishing up the final part of the Futai reviews, which should be out either at the end of this week or definitely early into next week. And of course, while I do think we have our fair amount of criticisms towards it, I gotta say, looking back at the OG gave me some new appreciation for it, in particular how it handled its leads. Do look forward to it. Until then though, farewell for now my friends, and don't worry Truck-kun, you'll get him next time.